Looks a hooded hero, silent like the whispers in the techno glow. From the cold streets where secrets grow, with vengeance burning deep and fire low. Shadows dance and flicker in the cyber gloom. Moves like a specter in a violet bloom. Eyes gleam with fury, slicing through the doom. Darkness can't escape the edge of its doom. Hooded ninja, he will strike. Sword of vengeance cuts the light. Darkness wielding sharpened blade. From the shadows you'll be saved.
Sit here and let this one day be turned into some kind of historical crisis that's being used to smear conservatives, Trump supporters, and anyone who has ever dared to question the outcome of the 2020 election. It's a witch hunt, plain and simple. The left has latched onto this one event and is milking it for all it's worth to distract from their own failures and to paint all of us on the right as if we're part of some extremist movement. That's what's really going on here. Let's talk about the double standard, shall we? We've all seen it. Where was all this outrage when cities across the country were burning throughout the summer of 2020? Where was the round-the-clock media coverage when innocent business owners were losing their livelihoods, when law enforcement officers were being attacked, and when government buildings were being targeted? I didn't hear anyone calling that an insurrection. No, that was conveniently labeled as mostly peaceful protests. So don't come to me now, crying about democracy being in danger because of what happened on one single day. But the hypocrisy doesn't stop there. Oh no. You've got Democrats standing up there acting like January 6th was the end of the world, like it was this orchestrated plot to overthrow the government. Give me a break. Was it an ugly day? Sure. Was there some rowdy, out of control behavior? Absolutely. But to call it an insurrection? Come on. Most of the people there were regular Americans who felt like they weren't being heard, who were angry about what they saw as an election process full of irregularities, who had watched their concerns dismissed over and over again by the media, by politicians, and by the courts. Were there a few bad actors? Yes. But you can't paint everyone with the same brush. Let's talk about why people were angry that day. Because you know what? Their anger didn't just come out of nowhere. It didn't come from some fringe corner of the internet. For months leading up to the election and for years before that, they watched as the media, big tech, and the political establishment worked overtime to discredit their voices, their concerns, and their way of life. They saw how double standards played out on social media, how certain viewpoints were censored or mocked, while others were promoted without question. They saw the pandemic used as a political tool, watched states unilaterally change election laws, and were told they weren't allowed to question it. And yet, when these Americans showed up to DC to voice their frustrations, guess what? The powers that be didn't want to hear it. They didn't care about those frustrations. They didn't care about election integrity. All they cared about was making sure the narrative stayed exactly where they wanted it. And now, because of a few bad actors, the rest of those peaceful protesters, yes, peaceful protesters, are being lumped in with extremists. That's the narrative, and it's disgusting. But what really drives me crazy is how January 6th is now being used as a political cudgel to justify everything. We're supposed to sit back and let the federal government crack down on domestic extremism, which is just another way of saying conservatives, because that's who they're targeting here. Don't believe me? Look at how parents who speak up at school board meetings are being labeled as domestic terrorists. Look at how anyone who even raises questions about election integrity is treated like they're part of some far-right conspiracy. And let me tell you, this isn't just about January 6th. This is about silencing any dissent that goes against the left's agenda. It's about making sure that if you support Trump, Or if you're a conservative, you're labeled as dangerous, as an enemy of the state. They want to make an example out of January 6th so that no one dares to question them ever again. Look, we all agree that law and order are essential. We agree that violence and rioting are wrong. But let's not pretend that January 6th was some sort of coordinated attack to overthrow the government. That's ridiculous. It was a protest that got out of hand. And guess what? It's been dealt with. People are being prosecuted, people are going to jail. But to act like this is the greatest threat our nation has ever faced. That's absurd, especially when we've got real problems like inflation, crime, and a border that's out of control. The truth is, January 6th has been used as a convenient distraction. A way to keep people from talking about the real issues. A way to keep conservatives on the defensive. And I, for one, am sick of it. Let's stop pretending that this one day defines who we are as a country or as a movement. It doesn't. We're not extremists. We're not insurrectionists. We're Americans who care about our country, who care about election integrity, and who care about being heard. And if the left can't handle that, then that's their problem, not ours. Alright, let's dive into this. Joe Biden's economic policies have been a hot topic of debate, with some feeling that the country is still in recovery mode after the pandemic, while others see his administration's moves as causing chaos. Let's break it down. First off, inflation. It feels like everything costs twice what it did 2 years ago. Groceries skyrocketed. Gas through the roof. And what's the solution? Telling people, oh, just hang tight, it'll stabilize. Stabilize when? When we're all broke. Biden's administration threw massive stimulus packages, which helped in the short run but now has some side effects. The prices of everyday goods have gone up and wages don't seem to keep pace. That's a chaos sandwich if I've ever seen one. Then there's the national debt. The government is throwing money around like it's monopoly cash. Trillions of dollars in debt, and no end in sight. Biden talks big about building back better, but what are we building on? A pile of IOUs. At some point, the bill's going to come due, and it's going to hit hard. Let's talk about energy. The administration's aggressive push for green energy has a lot of merits, but where's the balance? Shutting down oil pipelines and discouraging fossil fuels without solid, affordable alternatives has led to a mess. Gas prices spiked, and it seemed like every American had to take out a loan just to fill up the tank. And while clean energy is important, people are feeling the squeeze in the meantime. And don't get me started on small businesses. Post-pandemic, businesses were barely hanging on. Biden's economic policies, with rising wages and taxes, feel like they're squeezing the life out of them. Small business owners are being asked to do more with less, raising wages for their workers while paying higher costs for supplies. For a lot of them, that math just doesn't work. Finally, there's the jobs market. Sure, unemployment numbers look good on paper, but dig deeper. People are working, but are they earning enough to keep up with this economy? Many Americans are juggling 2 or 3 jobs just to stay afloat. It's like there's some disconnect between the people in Washington and the reality on the ground. So yeah, Biden's economic strategy feels like it's throwing darts blindfolded. There's some hope in certain areas, but overall, the impact on everyday Americans has left a lot of people feeling squeezed and unsure about the future. What's your take on the current situation? Joe Biden's presidency has stirred up a lot of mixed emotions, and if you're frustrated, you're definitely not alone. Let's break it down. First off, one of the big criticisms has been how his administration has handled the economy. The inflation rates have been brutal for a lot of people. Sure, there are global factors involved, but under Biden, prices for everyday items like groceries, gas, and rent have skyrocketed. People are feeling it at the gas pump and the grocery store, and it's hard to hear someone in Washington say things are getting better when your wallet says otherwise. Then, there's the handling of energy policy. Biden has pushed for clean energy, which is a good long-term goal, but shutting down pipelines and cutting back on oil production created immediate consequences. Gas prices soared, and while it's noble to want to go green, people still need to drive their cars and heat their homes right now. The push for electric vehicles and solar energy feels a bit tone-deaf when most Americans are just trying to get by week to week. The Afghanistan withdrawal was another point of contention. The chaotic way it was handled left a lot of Americans and allies stranded, and it painted a picture of disorganization and poor planning. Biden promised to end the war, which many supported, but the way it played out left a mark on the administration's reputation and created doubt about U.S. leadership on the global stage. Let's not forget his communication style. He often stumbles during speeches or seems to lose track of what he's saying, and while everyone has off days, it fuels concerns about his ability to lead effectively. People want a president who exudes confidence and has a clear, firm grasp on complex issues. When Biden struggles publicly, it leaves some wondering if he's really in control, or if he's just being pulled in different directions by his party. Immigration is another hot-button issue. The southern border remains a mess, with waves of migrants, and Biden's policies seem to have encouraged more people to make the dangerous journey, thinking the U.S. would be more lenient. Border security is stretched thin, and it's causing chaos not just at the border, but in cities and towns dealing with the influx of people. And on top of all that, there's this feeling that Washington under Biden is just more divided. He ran on a platform of uniting the country, but it seems like the polarization has only gotten worse. The country feels more divided than ever, and it's hard to point to any real progress in terms of bringing people together. In the end, Biden's presidency, for many, feels like a lot of missed opportunities, half-baked policies, and unfulfilled promises. Whether it's economic strain, handling of crises, or his leadership style, there's a growing frustration in the air. It's no surprise that people feel like they're being left behind or unheard. What are your thoughts on his time in office so far? The U.S. southern border crisis has been a point of major contention, and the situation just keeps getting worse. The issue has grown from a concern into what feels like an uncontrollable disaster, and Kamala Harris being appointed as the so-called border czar has done very little to fix it. Let's start with the sheer number of people crossing the border. Record high numbers of migrants are pouring in, and border facilities are overcrowded and understaffed. The situation is overwhelming, not just for the federal agencies tasked with handling it but also for local communities who have been left scrambling. When you have thousands of people arriving daily, the resources to manage them, housing, medical care, and processing, just aren't there. Local towns near the border are being flooded with people, and many just don't have the infrastructure to support such a massive influx. When Biden took office, one of the first things he did was roll back Trump-era immigration policies. Regardless of your stance on those policies, removing them without a clear replacement strategy in place was a recipe for chaos. The message sent, intentionally or not, was that the border was open. People heard that loud and clear, and that contributed to the surge of migrants, thinking they'd be welcomed in. Now, when Kamala Harris was named the border czar, a lot of people expected some real action. But what happened? She's barely shown up at the border and has instead talked about addressing the root causes of migration, like poverty and violence in Central America. Sure, that's a long-term goal, but people need immediate solutions. Talking about fixing corruption in Guatemala does nothing to stop the thousands of people crossing into Texas today. Her response felt disconnected from the reality on the ground. To make matters worse, the administration's approach has been inconsistent. One minute, they're saying the border is under control, the next, there's a crisis declaration because of the sheer numbers. It's like no one in Washington can decide whether they want to admit there's a problem or brush it under the rug. Meanwhile, border agents are overworked and overwhelmed, doing a job that feels impossible without proper resources or clear directives. Let's not forget the humanitarian aspect of this. People are making dangerous journeys through rough terrain, risking their lives to get here. The border has seen a rise in tragic deaths, from drownings in the Rio Grande to people dying in the desert. And human smugglers are capitalizing on the chaos, exploiting migrants and treating them as commodities. This situation should not just be a national security concern, but a human rights crisis as well. Then there's the political theater around it. Republicans are attacking the Biden administration for being too soft, Democrats are reluctant to criticize their own party, and in the middle of all this, nothing seems to actually improve. It's all talk, no action. Kamala Harris was supposed to take charge of this mess, but her absence and lack of a concrete plan have made the whole thing feel like a bad joke. Where's the accountability? What we need are clear, enforceable policies at the border. There's got to be a way to maintain security while also providing humane treatment for those seeking asylum. But the way things are going, it seems like no one in charge has a clue about how to strike that balance. And with Kamala Harris' leadership on the issue being practically invisible, the border crisis just continues to spiral out of control. The bottom line is that this problem has gone from a manageable issue to a full-blown disaster, and the people who are supposed to be handling it, Harris included, have fallen flat. Every day that goes by without action is another day the crisis deepens, and the American people and migrants alike are paying the price. What do you think should be done at this point? Anyways, let's talk about George Soros buying radio stations and buying Democrats. The idea that George Soros is buying off Democrats and purchasing radio stations is a narrative that tends to circulate in certain political circles, often relying on exaggeration or misinterpretation of the facts. While Soros, a billionaire philanthropist and hedge fund manager, has undeniably contributed large sums of money to progressive causes, painting him as some sort of puppet master controlling the Democratic Party or the media is a vast oversimplification at best, and at worst, a misleading conspiracy theory. Let's break this down. Yes, Soros has been involved in political contributions. Like many wealthy individuals, on both sides of the political spectrum, he uses his financial resources to support causes and candidates he believes in. The same can be said about figures like the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson, or Rupert Murdoch, who have also spent millions to push their preferred political agendas. But labeling Soros as some sort of democratic puppet master ignores the complexities of the political landscape and turns a legitimate practice, political donations, into something sinister. The claim that Soros is buying radio stations comes from reports of him funding progressive or Spanish-language media outlets, especially in communities that lean more conservative, like Cuban American or Venezuelan American populations. Soros' investments in these outlets, however, are often overblown as part of a supposed grand scheme to control the narrative. In reality, media ownership is nothing new in politics. Conservative media moguls like Rupert Murdoch have wielded far more influence over the media landscape for decades, with Fox News being a prime example. So why does Soros get so much attention? Some of it is rooted in his high profile as a liberal billionaire, but much of it can also be traced back to baseless conspiracy theories that have taken hold in recent years, portraying him as a shadowy figure pulling the strings behind the scenes. This idea has persisted despite a lack of evidence supporting such claims. Ironically, while accusations fly about Soros manipulating the media, other wealthy individuals continue to have far more. The term lawfare has become a buzzword for many conservatives and Republicans who feel like they're constantly under attack from legal and political systems rigged against them. It's become this twisted, infuriating strategy where the left doesn't even need to win elections anymore. They can just bog Republicans down in endless lawsuits, investigations, and legal battles until they can't even breathe. It's a way to weaponize the legal system to silence, smear, and intimidate anyone who dares to stand up to their insane policies. Take a look around. Every time a Republican tries to do something that actually makes sense for this country, they're dragged into court, slapped with subpoenas, or attacked by some politically motivated prosecutor who's more interested in making headlines than serving justice. Meanwhile, Democrats skate free, no matter how corrupt they are, no matter what crimes they commit. They could be knee-deep in scandal, and somehow, the legal system just looks the other way. It's an absolute joke. And don't even get me started on the media's role in all of this. They love playing up these legal battles, turning every conservative into the bad guy. They'll splash some overhyped lawsuit all over the front page, painting Republicans as criminals, and conveniently forget to mention when the case eventually falls apart because it was BS from the start. But by then, the damage is done, right? Reputation destroyed, resources drained, and all because the left can't handle losing a fair fight. Let's talk about lawfare against any conservatives and Republicans. It's lawfare, plain and simple, and it's disgusting. It's not just about politics anymore, it's about silencing opposition. It's about making sure conservatives can't speak up, can't govern, can't even exist without the constant threat of legal retribution hanging over their heads. It's manipulation, it's abuse of power, and it's a disgrace to the entire idea of justice in this country. The system's supposed to be blind, but now it's just another tool for the left to crush anyone who dares to challenge their insane, destructive agenda. Enough is enough. Okay, folks. Let's speak about the election failures this day, where we cut through the mainstream media's spin and get to the truth. Today, we're diving into a story that should surprise no one: the disastrous end of Kamala Harris's failed presidential campaign. The vice president, who many Democrats once touted as the next big thing, has bowed out of the 2024 race, and frankly, it's been a long time coming. Let's break down what went wrong, and why we saw this coming a mile away. Host. First off, let's not forget, folks, the media was trying to prop her up from the beginning. Back in 2020, when she became Biden's running mate, they told us Harris was going to be a historic leader, a symbol of progress and change. They paraded her around as the first female, Black, and South Asian vice president, but what they forgot is that identity politics alone doesn't make someone qualified to run a country. It didn't matter to the left that Harris had a thin record and a history of flip-flopping on issues; she was the face they wanted to sell to America. But what happened when she finally tried to stand on her own 2 feet? Disaster. The fall of a manufactured candidate. Host. Kamala Harris's campaign was doomed from the start. Why? Because Harris never had a clear message, and she lacked the leadership skills to rally the country, or even her own party. The Democrats thought that putting her in the spotlight would be enough, but the American people weren't buying it. From day one, Harris struggled to articulate any real vision for America. Remember her debate performances. The talking points were stale. She dodged questions, and when she didn't, her answers were either incoherent or scripted. She got called out for it repeatedly. Whether it was on healthcare, immigration, or the economy, Harris just couldn't provide any substance. It became obvious that she was more about political posturing than offering real solutions. Identity politics over policy. Host. Now, let's address the elephant in the room: identity politics. The left wanted to use Harris's race and gender as shields from criticism. If you dared to criticize her policies, or lack thereof, you were labeled a racist or sexist. This is the tired game they play, and frankly, Americans are sick of it. But guess what? Voters don't care about the boxes Harris checks off in the intersectional bingo game. They care about their jobs, their safety, their freedom. And Harris had nothing to offer them. It became clear that Democrats put her in this race not because of her policies or competence, but because they thought they could capitalize on identity politics yet again. Well, this time, it failed spectacularly. Host. Just look at how she failed to connect with any significant voter base. Even among African Americans, a demographic she was supposed to appeal to, her numbers were abysmal. Why? Because she didn't do anything for them. Harris's record as California's Attorney General haunted her, especially among younger, more progressive voters who saw her as a flip-flopper. One minute she's a tough-on-crime prosecutor, the next minute she's pretending to champion criminal justice reform. No one trusted her. And don't even get me started on working-class voters. Harris tried to position herself as a champion for working families, but her record shows she's anything but. She's out of touch with the everyday struggles of Americans, and it showed. A campaign in chaos. Host. And it wasn't just her public image that was a mess. Internally, her campaign was in shambles. The reports of infighting, power struggles, and poor management started leaking out months ago. Key staffers were jumping ship, fundraising was drying up, and donors were pulling their support. Why? Because even Democrats saw the writing on the wall: Harris wasn't going to make it. Her team couldn't agree on a strategy because there was no clear vision from the top. It was all about optics, all about trying to recreate the same buzz that carried Obama to the presidency. But here's the thing: Obama had charisma, a message even if we didn't agree with it, and knew how to rally his base. Kamala. Not so much. Host. Let's not forget how Harris failed to respond to key issues during her time as vice president. When Biden tapped her to handle the border crisis, what did she do? She avoided it. She didn't visit the border for months, and when she did, it was all for show. No solutions, no plans, no leadership. She ignored one of the biggest problems facing our nation, and Americans took note of that failure. The poll numbers told the story. Host. The polls were clear. She was consistently trailing behind other Democrats like Gavin Newsom and Pete Buttigieg. At one point, her approval rating dropped lower than even Joe Biden's, which says a lot, considering Biden's own numbers have been underwater for a while now. The American people, Republicans, independents, and even a large portion of Democrats, simply didn't want Harris anywhere near the Oval Office. So, what does the Democratic Party do now? They've been forced to abandon the Kamala Harris experiment. And trust me, they'll try to pretend she never ran. They'll sweep her failures under the rug, just like they always do when one of their own falls short. But we won't forget. What happens next for the left? Host. With Harris out of the picture, the Democrats are in a tough spot. It's clear the party is divided. They've got the far-left progressives pushing for radical change, and the moderates, like Biden, trying to hold on to some semblance of the old Democratic Party. Kamala was supposed to bridge that gap, but she failed. Now, they're scrambling to find a candidate who can appeal to both sides, and it's not going to be easy. Meanwhile, over here on the right, we're ready. We're focused on what matters, restoring American values, securing our borders, boosting our economy, and standing up to the radical left's agenda. We've got a fighter in Donald Trump, and you better believe we're going to make sure the country stays on the path of freedom and prosperity. Final thoughts. Host. Kamala Harris's campaign didn't fail because of racism or sexism, as the left will try to tell you. It failed because Harris was an unqualified, out-of-touch candidate who couldn't connect with voters or lead a campaign. The American people saw through the media's attempt to sell Harris as the next great leader. At the end of the day, her failure is a reflection of the Democratic Party's failure to offer real solutions to the problems facing our country. As always, we'll keep exposing the truth here on American Insight. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning of the 2024 race. And we've got plenty more to talk about as we gear up to take our country back. Until next time, stay strong, Patriots.